at least
I
for
noticed.
yeah. So I mean, also because honestly, way before there was law in my life, there was science fiction, there was fantasy, like far before I even knew that there was such a thing as law, and so that's always been kind of a primary identity, at least for me. And in that capacity, I began life as a fan. For many years, I was a fan, obsessed with fantasy and science fiction. Then moved into reviewing novels for Strange Horizons, which is a weekly magazine.
It's a
3 weeks of
fabulous magazine for guys. If you've not read it, you definitely have to check out the website. It's super fun. Yours,
yeah, it's really
another story from there was up for the Hugo Award. Am I correct?
yeah. Shiv Ramdas had a story which was set around the Bengal famine, so that was yeah. So I began reviewing for them, and I joined the editorial board, and I've been an editor with them on the nonfiction side for the last like 4 years. So there's been that background before the novel actually came into being, and I think that is my introduction to my introducing myself as a science fiction writer. That is the trajectory, not anything else that
And I
may
think
exist.
he's done so much that he has to
Oh my
compartment
God.
it.
Yeah, but that's it. Yeah.
But in case you guys don't know, Gautam was very involved in the Aadhaar decision, which I bring up. And he has books on privacy and on freedom of speech. And I bring these up because I think they are, whether he likes it or not, quite related to The Wall, which talks about the importance of freedom. Which, hi, Nishant. I'm going to mute. Anybody who wants to ask questions, just unmute yourself. I'm just going to mute so that there's no sort of
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hi, Hamsika. Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I'm not sure whether to mute or unmute, so I keep switching and I look stupid. Sorry.
You know what I do is I just unmute and I have a question to ask.
Okay. I just wanted to say, hi Gautam. I've come from the other panel that you did with the book club, the hour and a half panel with Hasgeek.
Ah, yeah,
Uh,
right.
So
Yeah.
I did that just before lunch and now I'm doing this. So.
Oh, hey, thanks. That's some,
Having Bhatia Sunday.
thank you.
Yeah. And I finished reading The Wall yesterday in a single day.
Oh wow, okay. That's the single day read are the biggest compliments an author can receive.
For
So
sure, for sure. I don't want to spoil it by saying I am currently unemployed, but it was also, I mean, I did really like sink my teeth into the book. So yeah, anyway, I'm sorry guys, please go on.
No, I think that at least he's on cloud nine. I can see him right on top. It is I don't know how many of you have completed the book. It is 427 pages, but it is a good read. I am a pretty harsh critic. Gautam knows because I've criticized a few of his other books and we've been back and forth. But it's a really good read, and it is really possible to finish it in one day because you're just desperate to know what happens. Which obviously he screws you over because there's a cliffhanger.
no spoilers, but yeah, kind of. Yeah.
So, Gautam, when did you start writing The Wall? When I was reading it, I felt as if it was over a period of time.
Yeah, that's a pretty astute observation. It began it in 2008, so it's been 12 years in the making.
Oh, wow.
Began it in college as an undergrad, and I mean, I think the thing is about, I mean, fantasy and science fiction has this whole fandom, right? Like it just lends itself to people wanting to write, and I was no different from in that sense. So many other fans I just wanted to keep like writing, and I had like 10 or 12 unfinished novels I wrote on in notebooks at the back of class in school and in college as well. And this was the one that kind of like
Stuck.
carried through. So I began it in 2008. I had a couple of drafts in college. Then when real life kind of sort of intervened, it was suspended for a while. So for about 5 or 6 years, it was just there somewhere in the back of my mind. And I came back to it and rewrote and finished it in the last 2.5 years. So I guess like 12 years it was there, and about like 5 or 6 years of active writing and thinking about it.
Wow. And this is in between the law work that we will not talk about ever in this book club.
Yeah. Kind of like, sort
That's crazy. Congratulations.
of, yeah.
And also, guys,
Thanks.
Hi, this is Charu.
Hi, Charu.
May I ask something?
Of course.
So, I haven't finished the book, although I was enjoying everything that is, I was enjoying and also slightly alarmed by, as one is when reading dystopian fiction, so many parallels to one's own world. Uh, the language of the law, how it is used by those who want to restrict your access. Um, really, really eerie, and which is probably why I left it midway, because it was feeling a little too claustrophobic. My experience with dystopian fiction has been that it has occupied me a lot, and after a point, I just cannot continue. Um, it happened back when I was studying literature. I actually wanted to research on it. Mercifully, although at the time I was very sad, mercifully no teacher showed interest, and I left literature. Otherwise, I would be.
Sorry,
Somebody wants to add something.
No. I think it's just an unmuted. Go on, Charu.
All right. So I left it. I left the plans for research into it, which is good because I was too much of a depressive to continue something like that, at least at that time. I definitely have better coping mechanisms and discipline of hope, you can say. All my comment is coming from somebody who has left it midway, precisely at 50%, because I could not go on.
Right.
What is it like to have a story like that at the back of your mind for 12 years? And also,
Charu, I think you're cutting off just a little bit.
I was just saying that
Right.
it's definitely less pompous and boring than it sounds. And I definitely got the cave analogy
Right.
and that reference. And it's curious because Plato, Plato looked down upon democracy, was not a fan.
Yeah.
And you use that analogy precisely for the opposite.
Yeah. No, I mean, so I guess there are two questions there, and I'll take them in turn. One is a story at the back of my mind for 12 years. So I think first of all, of course, I mean the author is dead, so like it really depends on how readers receive the book. It's not written as a dystopia. I personally don't think it's a dystopia. And again, without giving away, what comes after, and in fact, there's like a whole second book which is being written. I just say that this is not a dystopic novel in the line of 1984, Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sewer. Like it's not dystopic. And a couple of ways specifically, I tried consciously not to make it dystopic. The first way being that the city within the wall is not a city where you have like tangible cruelty or tangible oppression. Yes, there are hierarchies, there are structures, and there is inequality. But it's not that any one group or individual is being crushed underfoot and is in that sense being so it's not dystopic in that kind of bleakness that comes from a complete absence of hope and a crushing of people. So that's not the case, and in fact that's the whole reason why the arguments about going beyond the wall or not going beyond the wall are not one-sided. So it's not meant to be an easy decision or an easy kind of like thing that like this is something that is obvious and natural. So that's one thing. So I'd say like there's a conscious attempt not to make it dystopic, and I think I hope that you will read on and find for yourself that there are elements in it that consciously push back against this, I think, contemporary trend of just writing these bleak dystopias, and that's never been something that I've been attracted to. I always think that the reason why we write fantasy and science fiction is because A, we can imagine alternatives to the way we live, and B, that it allows for a certain kind of escape and being able to imagine certain kinds of hope that may not always be present in real life. So I think that's at least my task. On Plato, yes. So again, that's a really acute observation. this whole idea that, Plato's idea of a cave and people living inside that cave where they can only see reflections of the world, and the real world, the substance vis-a-vis the shadow that you see in the cave, um, is one of the framing images for the novel. And again, keeping in with the earlier theme of complicating things and not giving any easy answers. For Plato, the answers are very clear and very obvious. You have the pure world of forms, and then you have the earthly world of shadows, and he talks about the ideal republic that approximates that ideal world he has in mind. And so for him, and then of course he talks about casting out poets. So he's very, very clear that this is the way a well-governed republic would look like. And of course he is the central figure in Western philosophy since that time. And so the idea of reversing the Plato image and putting the Plato image in the mouth of someone who is very consciously an anti-Plato figure was to, again, as part of the broader idea behind the novel, was that that the answer is never an easy one. And even when we think that there are clear answers, actually, if you look at it, both sides have a point. And when the reader comes to the book, the idea is that they leave the book not quite sure whose side they're on. That was an attempt that I was making. And so many of the references and analogies that you see, including Plato, is actually the authorial intent there is to reverse, kind of subvert some of these very classic tropes, and then see what the impact is.
Guys, I think there are so many questions I have, but I know there's so many people here with questions. Charu, I have to tell you, as someone who did not just take one day to finish the book, you should read further, because it's, without also wanting to give away the ending, it's quite a hopeful book, I think. And Charu wants to say thank you. Much appreciated. I think she sent it privately to me, though. What about, and I think this is a question a lot of people probably have already asked you, and it's going to keep coming up, because you have specifically chosen, I'm actually not even sure if she is a lesbian. I'm still wondering whether she's pansexual, but you've chosen an LGBT female character.
Yeah.
And of course, the trend nowadays is very much own voice writing. So there's a lot of push for LGBT characters to be written by people from the community and so on.
Yeah.
It's too much of a change from being a cisgender heterosexual person for it not to have been conscious, I think.
Yeah.
So how come? And how did you sort of research the character? She's very well drawn out, I think. I really liked her. I like her girlfriend better.
Thanks. No. So this is a really important question, and I want to answer it in two parts. Mm-hmm. The first part is the choice to make the protagonist a queer character. I think the answer there is a simple one, and it's an answer that I think Rick Riordan put very well in a response to a very similar question, which is that the world is diverse. Mm-hmm. The world is very plural, and it's a complex and messy world that we inhabit. Mm-hmm. So why is it remarkable if the protagonist is queer? In fact, it's what should be remarkable is that for all these years of science fiction and fantasy, somehow the protagonists were always straight, mostly straight men. That choice is what reflects a certain narrowness of thinking and of the world. Mm-hmm. It is this that should actually be taken for granted, and that is what should be critiqued as being too narrow. So I think with respect to the choice of protagonist, that would be my answer, and more also a narrative answer, which is that in the context of this novel, it also made narrative sense because, and I don't think this is a spoiler, so I'll say it. I do think that, a large part of what social relations and laws reflect is based on material, the material relations underlying those laws and social prejudices. And I did want to have this thought experiment where you have this world within the wall where resources are by definition scarce. And so you're always worried about the population getting to a point in which those resources can no longer be enough. This is not like that abstract kind of elite fear, right, that we have in our societies, where distribution is the
Right.
but here's a genuine and real fear that literally this world cannot sustain because it's bounded, physically bounded. So in that case, there would no longer be perhaps as strong a reason, a material reason to have these prejudices that have existed in our societies. And in fact, it may even be the reverse, which is something I explore in the book. So it also made narrative sense in that way. I think the second and more difficult question is the process of writing the character, because the fact is that in the world we inhabit, there has been a long history and a continuing present of structural discrimination, violence, and oppression against LGBTQ people, and that has obviously naturally shaped the way they engage with the world and the way that we who inhabit more privileged axes engage with them. And so there were two ways of doing it. One, of course, I think this is the less important is the wrong word, impactful ways, of course, reading about these experiences, reading books like Covering by Kenji Yoshino, books like that kind of spell out that experience. I think the far more helpful and important process was sensitivity reads. So for anyone who doesn't know, sensitivity reading, I don't know if it exists outside the science fiction fantasy writing space, but sensitivity reading is when you put that like depiction, you ask someone from the community, whether it's on the axis of gender or of caste or of class or whatever it is you're writing, to read.
Someone with that.
Sorry?
You are someone who has experienced it.
Well, more than one person, yeah. And I got good feedback, and I got blunt feedback. There was one scene that is no longer in the novel, where there was a comment where one person commented saying this reads straight. This actually reads like a straight relationship. It's not reading like a queer relationship. And so of course that scene was excised, and it was kind of massively rewritten after discussions. So those specific scenes went through, I think, 4 or 5 rewrites, and they were all like kind of really put through sensitivity reads where things were explained to me that, look, this is what you're getting wrong, and this is what you need to kind of figure out. So that was the writing process.
For example, what kind of scenes did you write that you got wrong? We would love to know.
Well, so in chapter 3, there is a scene where Mithila and Rama are going up to the top of the tower of the council, where they kind of look upon the entire city, and they have a kind of a conversation. So that conversation earlier involved something that came in a much later chapter, and effectively had one of them comforting the other for an event that took place earlier in the storyline narrative. That conversation, when it was read by someone, that was when they said this reads like a straight conversation between like a straight like a straight relationship, because this is not how these conversations happen. So then kind of I asked, and then it was altered. So it was more a sense of there's no sense of like experiences don't obviously map in certain ways, and so like how do you try and of course there'll always be a gap, but I guess by listening carefully and listening in good faith, it's possible sometimes to take a few steps towards bridging that gap. And I think for me at least, it was worth it.
I know the scene you're talking about. Actually, it's one of my favorites.
Well, I'm glad that it worked. Yeah, yeah.
What else about the wall, guys? Do you have any questions, or is it just going to be me? I can talk. He can talk. We're lawyers. Also. When you were reading The Wall, my impression, honestly, was from the beginning was that it's not dystopian. And one of the reasons was, for example, like you said, it wasn't an easy choice for people to leave. They were comfortable where they were. There wasn't an obvious police violence. I mean, there were the Shurtans, which in my head, I kept thinking of them as the Shiv Sena or the RSS. Like, I even That was my uniform for the. Did you know that's the Punjabi word for warrior? Or
I did not know that until you told me. No, I did not know that.
how did you come up with all these names?
Okay, so some of them are obviously like are names from our milieu, but some of them are literally just came out of my head. So Shurtan just like literally got out of my head. So
Oh, really?
yeah. So I didn't know it was the Punjabi word for warrior until you told me. Yeah.
Oh God. And here I've written it like you knew.
Yeah. It
And
also is that. So
well, it's good. It's like serendipity. It works.
yeah.
But let's go on to talk about this idea which you discussed earlier, which is in a world which has limited resources, where it's not in their interest to increase their population, there will be much more acceptance of the LGBT community because, well, I mean, you and I have both seen the 377 cases. Most of the arguments are that it's unnatural because we can't have children.
Yeah.
And so on. I mean, silly arguments like that. Now, one of the things that I really liked about the wall was that there was just no questioning of anyone's sexuality. It was very normal, as in when she came back and her father asked her, "So you've been hanging out with this girl?" And other people said, "Oh, you've been hanging out with this privileged girl." What about, I mean, it's fiction, but we are obviously, when we're writing, we don't realize we are sort of informed by our own experiences and what we see around. So, was it difficult to imagine a world like that where it was just taken the same as you have an arm and a leg? And
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult, and I had multiple conversations with the people who beta read the book about that, and there was this big debate that we had that to what extent will it actually be this, natural in that sense, and wouldn't there be obviously some residues that are always bleeding into any world uh, where sexuality kind of exists, right? So there'll always be taboos or prejudices around that. So is it like actually this accepted? I think finally, I mean, so in that sense, it was the challenge was to what extent would sexuality be something that was even salient
sort of
in
environment,
the
yes.
world, and it shouldn't be that in making it accepted, you kind of also make it kind of irrelevant, because that again would not be really true to how societies function. So one way to kind of address that was at various points of the novel, maybe not enough, but and it'll maybe come a bit more in book 2. There's kind of various jokes that people make, about the distinction between heterosexual and homosexual relationships, and to the extent that again you have this whole idea of a constant fear of overpopulation, and so that kind of gives a certain edge to that thing. It's a different kind of edge, but there still exists a certain kind of an edge. So that is sprinkled at various parts in the novel. But by and large, my belief was that if the material conditions change this much, then there'll also be an equally radical alteration to how we perceive ideas of sexuality, sexual orientation, and so on. And the attempt was kind of experiment with what might it look like if there was the radical alteration where like it just genuinely did not matter because of the overarching material conditions you're in. So just the social trajectory would be completely different for like 2,000 years. So that was kind of like the challenge, was to imagine how that would look like in a plausible way.
One of the things I thought was very interesting about the world was, in some ways, Sumer is an ideal city. Everyone sort of knows their place. There's not much violence. I mean, there's barely any in the book unless you sort of have a confrontation. Everything is working. It's like clockwork. I mean, everyone gets there. So in that sense, it's almost an ideal city or what we want, but just missing this one element of freedom and new knowledge. And how did you tackle that? Because that is what made the difficult. That is what made it so difficult to hate everyone in that city completely, or especially the elders, because you did kind of see the point of view. And how do you sort of relate that to what we're going through right now? I mean, I know you wrote this ages ago, but it's come out in quite a timely manner. Very much bold. How did you relate that to? It's a difficult thing to write about, I think, to not take the side, of either freedom and say, look, this is all important, and not look at the practicality of how the world really runs on resources and limitations.
Yeah.
So how did that sort of come about? What was your thought process? And how did you build the elders' characters, especially Rama's mom and dad? I thought they were,
The father, only the father
yeah,
is
the father.
the
He's a,
president is not her mom; it's somebody else. Yeah.
sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
the elders, not the mom. Yeah, but that's a very interesting. I thought he was a very interesting character. It was very hard for me to hate him. So that I got his point of view.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I think, again, so I think there's the two answers there. One is that for me, the best science fiction and speculative one that has placed the question but not answered it, and left the readers to answer it. I think that Ursula Le Guin was particularly brilliant at this. The dispossessed, left hand of darkness, the word for world is forest, right? Every one of her books kind of places the question. It indicates where her sympathies lie, but it doesn't force those sympathies on the readers. And so I think that the path was very well laid out for me there. Like there was a clear model about how you go about doing that, and I think that is something that I personally don't like the speculative fiction that really sets out that conflict in clear terms and says this is your side, take that side, and then tries to complicate it within that. So I think that at the point of taking off sides is when you have to bring in the complexity, because otherwise you've flattened out one very important part of our experience.
Yeah.
So that was the answer to the first question. And the second question, yeah, the elders again. So and I just felt that if you read histories and and you always find these portraits of people in power, who and the kind of the logic of their office drives them to do a series of things, which if that was not the case, they would not do them as people. Of course, that doesn't excuse what they're doing, but it does again complicate their characters. And so part of the characterization of the elders, kind of the governing council in the city, was that the logic of their office forces them to take certain actions that are in conflict with what they as people might do if they were absolutely free to do. And that I think maybe helps to empathize with them while also not sparing them, the burden of judgment, so to say.
Guys, we have 8 minutes left on this Zoom call, as it's mentioning to me. So does anyone have more questions about the wall that they would like to ask? Now is the time. Unmute yourselves. I've unmuted all of you.
I can still see mute before everyone, though.
Really?
Like everyone's still muted.
I keep unmute. Oh, all, it says all. No, let's not go with this. We only have 7 minutes. Unmute yourselves and let's ask some difficult questions of Gautam Bhatia, like he has been asking of us with this book and several others that shall not be named. Garima? I know Garima was reading this book with me, so she did have a few questions.
Yeah, I think she's still.
They can unmute themselves, bro.
Fair enough.
Hi, can I have a go?
There we go. Yes, please.
Mukul, I had a question of Gautam, which is, all of us who read science fiction, there are many kinds of classifications we can impose upon this. But one that I find quite useful, thinking about the genre, is when you're doing sort of world building, is this a world that lies somewhere along an imagined chronology of our world, which is Earth, or is it some alternative world altogether? I think the reason I ask this question is that when you read, say, American science fiction of a certain world-building kind, say the Ringworld stories, you can see what the writer is doing is that it's a completely zanily different world from the one we live in, but it is recognizably a future of the place we live in now. So, the characters will speak a peculiar kind of interworld. The geography might be slightly altered, but it's essentially Earth.
Yeah.
Because one of the, the richness of that kind of writing sometimes is because it allows for a kind of range of amusing pop cultural reference, a kind of sense of dislocation when something is turned on its head. Whereas there's also another kind of fiction which can be wonderful, but which exists hermetically which is signaled to be just another place, not this world. So, which one is the wall?
Yeah, that's a sorry.
No, I was going to say, I had that question too. Such a good question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and so the science fiction that has really fascinated me since I was a kid is the science fiction, speculative fiction, in which you take the world as it is and then tweak one or two things, and then ask yourselves what would happen if there's one thing you take for granted. It's so normal that you never notice it. It's as normal as breath. And that one thing was to be changed. How would everything else change? I think that one person who does this, who did this very well, and I say this with with knowledge of a sexual harassment, kind of like multiple sexual harassment things that he did, was Asimov in Nightfall. And much as I can no longer really ever read Asimov in the same way again, that novel I think did that to perfection. And that there was this, you have this thing where that in that world, because you have like 6 stars, 6 suns, the people have never known what night is, and nightfall comes once in like 2,500 years. And what would happen when night came, right? So this kind of, and also Le Guin's Dispossessed, right? It's something similar, just in a very different way. So this idea that everything else is the same, but these one or two things that are so normal that we never even think about them are changed, and then what might be the case. So the wall is in that mold of speculative fiction, trying to like just shift one thing or change one thing, and then say, okay, now like think or like experiment with what would happen there.
Thank you for that.
Naz's free movement, which turned from fiction to non-fiction just around the time the wall came out, huh? I do think a lot of people will be traumatized while reading the first half. Google went to escape. Guys, couple of minutes remaining, and then this Zoom call is going to shut itself because this is how they are.
Automatic extension it got at 40 minutes.
It does, really. I don't want to count on it though.
I want to add something.
Yes, please.
Again. I have been in the habit of only reading non-fiction for about a year or so, and I came across something by T.V. Mehta, where he said that those who don't read fiction have no grasp of reality. And I read The House for Spirits, and yours was the second fiction that I picked up, and it was eerily similar to my reality. So thank you for that one. Not what I wanted, but
unfamiliar as it goes on. It'll get more unfamiliar, hopefully, and as it goes on.
Yes. But though that you're in good company. The House is Spirits.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
But I also have to say, sorry, I interrupted.
No, you didn't. I interrupted. Go on.
I have to say that I definitely have an appreciation for a nuanced way of looking at things. Especially now, I think we all do, because of the way lines are being drawn. And the complex argument, while it unsettles, it definitely stays with me longer. And I'm definitely going to come back to it.
Good. I'm glad about that.
There's a question for you in private chat, which is, what were the books and texts that you read in order to understand or help yourself imagine a world that wasn't a heteronormative society? I think you have sort of.
Yeah, Kenji Yoshino's Cowering was like a big, like a really, probably like one thing that was very foundational in that understanding. But is the question? I think it's a slightly different question though. Is it like how to imagine a world which
definitely
not yeah, okay, so there's a lot of contemporary science fiction that does that really well. One is Yoon Ha Lee's Machineries of Empire series. That I found. Yoon Ha Lee himself is transgender, and like that series does that really well. Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice also has very interesting stuff with pronouns and with gender and things like that. So that's the second book that does that really well. So one more I read recently. R.K.D. Martin's Memory Called Empire. So contemporary speculative fiction is just like full of brilliantly imagined future worlds in which, you know, gender plays a very different kind of you know, framing role that it does in our world, and there's just so much good stuff being written on those lines. Also, I think because the speculative fiction community today is very diverse and really inclusive in that sense. You just get all this excellent work. In fact, just right now, I'm reading a book called The Four Profound Weaves by Rose Lemberg, in which the protagonists are trans, and Rose Lemberg themselves are trans. So there is like this so much